The dust from Martha Winslow's skirts hadn't even settled on the church steps before the whispers started, sharp and cutting as barbed wire across her back. She could feel every eye in Placerville, California, boring into her as she descended, her husband Henry's hand notably absent from her elbow, his expression carved from granite as he strode 3 paces ahead. It was the summer of 1878, and Martha had just endured another Sunday sermon where Reverend Thompson had waxed eloquent about the blessings of large families and fruitful wombs. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made the wooden buildings shimmer in the distance and turned the main street into a river of amber dust. At 35 years old, after 12 years of marriage, Martha's womb remained empty as the collection plate after a poor harvest. "Such a shame, Mrs. Beatrice Holloway's voice carried deliberately. "A woman that age with no children. What use is she to anyone?" Martha's fingers tightened on her small handbag, but she kept her chin level, her spine straight. She had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged the vultures to circle closer. Henry said nothing in her defense, just kept walking toward their modest house at the edge of town, his boots creating small clouds with each purposeful step. That evening, as Martha prepared a supper of salt pork and beans, Henry finally spoke. His words were measured, rehearsed, and they landed like hammer blows. "I've been thinking, Martha. A man needs heirs, needs sons to carry on his name. You've had 12 years and nothing. Maybe it's time we faced facts." Martha's hand stilled over the cast iron pot. "What facts would those be, Henry? That you're barren. That I married a woman who can't give me what I need." He stood, pushing back from the table with a scrape that set her teeth on edge. "I'm going to stay at the boarding house for a spell. Give us both time to think about what comes next." He left before the beans had finished cooking, taking his spare clothes and his father's pocket watch. Martha stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his horses' hoofbeats fade into the distance, and realized she wasn't crying. She had used up all her tears years ago, spent them in the darkness of countless nights, month after month of hope crushed like wildflowers under wagon wheels. The next morning, Martha woke to find her world had shifted on its axis. Henry hadn't just gone to the boarding house. He had gone to the saloon first, where whiskey had loosened his tongue and his complaints had found sympathetic ears. By noon, half the town knew their marriage was dissolving like sugar in hot coffee, and they all knew why. Martha held her head high as she walked to Henderson's general store for supplies, but the silence that fell when she entered spoke volumes. Women turned their backs. Men tipped their hats but wouldn't meet her eyes. Even kindly, Mr. Henderson seemed uncomfortable as he totaled her purchases, his usual friendly chatter replaced by careful formality. It was when she left the store, arms full of parcels, that her foot caught on a loose board and she stumbled. Her purchases scattered across the wooden sidewalk, flour splitting open in a white cloud, eggs cracking in golden pools. She dropped to her knees to gather what she could, blinking hard against the sting of humiliation. "Let me help you with that, madam." The voice was deep, warm as sun-heated leather, and came with a pair of weathered hands that began efficiently collecting her scattered goods. Martha looked up into a face she didn't recognize, though in a town the size of Placerville, that was unusual. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water, green-brown and clear. His hat was pushed back, revealing sandy hair touched with gold, and his smile was gentle without being pitying, which somehow made it harder to maintain her composure. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the canned goods he'd retrieved. "You're very kind. Just doing what any decent person would." He helped her to her feet, then nodded toward the broken eggs. "Looks like you'll be needing to replace those. Would you allow me?" Seems only right since I startled you. You didn't startle me. My own clumsiness did this. Well then, let me help because I'd like to. Name's Grant Anderson. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Martha shook it. His palm was calloused, his grip firm but careful. Martha Winslow. She watched his face for recognition, for the shadow of judgment she'd seen in so many others, but found only polite interest. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Winslow. I just hired on at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of here. Been traveling for a spell, and Placerville seemed like a good place to settle for a season or two. He gathered her remaining packages and gestured toward the store. Let me replace those eggs, and then I'll walk you home if you'd permit it. These parcels look heavy. Something in Martha wanted to refuse, to maintain the walls she'd built around herself, but something else, something she'd thought long dead, whispered that maybe accepting one small kindness wouldn't hurt. All right. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. They walked through town together, and Martha felt the stares like physical touches, but Grant seemed oblivious to the attention. He talked easily about his travels, about working ranches from Texas to Montana, about his hope that California might finally be the place he could put down roots. His voice had a rhythm to it that reminded Martha of poetry, of better times before her failure as a woman had defined her entire existence. "This is my home," she said finally, stopping before the small house with its neat garden and white picket fence. Henry had built that fence 6 years ago when they'd still believed a child might come, might need keeping safe from the street. Grant set her packages on the porch with care. "You've got a nice place here, Mrs. Winslow. Those roses are particularly fine." He nodded toward the yellow blooms climbing the trellis she'd put in herself. "They're my consolation," Martha said, then immediately regretted the words. They revealed too much, but Grant just smiled, touching the brim of his hat. "A person who can grow roses that beautiful has a gift. Plants don't flourish for just anyone. They need patience, attention, love." He stepped back. "I hope I'll see you around town, madam. It's been a pleasure." Martha watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the dusty street, and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. It took her several minutes to identify it as hope, and when she did, she firmly told it to leave her alone. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford, but Placerville was a small town, and over the following weeks, Martha found her path crossing Grant Anderson's with surprising frequency. He attended the same church, sitting in the back pew and listening attentively to Reverend Thompson's sermons. He shopped at Henderson's general store. He took his meals at the boarding house where Henry now resided, though Martha only knew this through overheard conversations. Each time they encountered each other, Grant tipped his hat and offered a genuine smile, treating her with the same courtesy he showed everyone else. He didn't seem to notice or care about the whispers that followed Martha like a shadow, didn't join in the pointed conversations about women's duties and divine judgment. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Martha was in her garden, fighting with a stubborn weed that refused to relinquish its grip on her carrot patch, when a voice called out from the street. "Looks like you could use some help with that, Mrs. Winslow." She looked up to find Grant leaning against her fence, his horse tied to the post, watching her struggle with amusement playing around his mouth. "It's a particularly determined weed," Martha admitted, sitting back on her heels and pushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I think it has deeper roots than my carrots. Mind if I give it a try?" Without waiting for an answer, he unlatched the gate and strode into her garden, dropping to one knee beside her. His hands, large and strong, gripped the weed near its base and worked it back and forth with practiced patience until the earth released it, root and all. "How did you do that?" Martha asked, genuinely impressed. "Spent enough time working soil to know its moods. You can't just pull straight up. You've got to convince the earth to let go." He brushed dirt from his hands and looked around her garden with appreciation. "You've done well here. These vegetables look healthy, well tended." "Gardening is something I'm good at," Martha said quietly, "unlike other things expected of women." Grant's expression grew serious. "I've heard some talk around town, Mrs. Winslow, and if you'll forgive me saying so, it seems mighty unkind." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Small towns thrive on gossip, Mr. Anderson. I'm merely the current topic of conversation. Gossip can be cruel." He stood, offering his hand to help her rise. "For what it's worth, I think a person's value has nothing to do with their ability to have children. There's 100 ways to matter in this world." The simple statement, delivered without pity or awkwardness, struck Martha with unexpected force. Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them, and she turned away quickly, but Grant had already seen. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't." Martha wiped at her eyes with dirt-stained fingers. "You're the first person in this town, besides maybe Mr. Henderson, who's treated me like I'm still a human being worth something. Do you know what that means to someone who's been made to feel like a failure every single day?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of its own experience. "I do, actually. Lost my wife and baby daughter 5 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other. For a long time after, people treated me like I was broken glass, like I might shatter if they said the wrong thing. Or worse, they acted like I should be over it, ready to move on and start fresh. Like Sarah and Emma were just chapters in a book I'd finished reading." Martha turned back to face him, seeing grief etched in the lines around his eyes, understanding in his expression. "I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for whatever pain you've endured." He met her gaze directly. "But pain doesn't define us, Mrs. Winslow. It shapes us, sure, but it doesn't have to be the whole story." They stood in the garden, surrounded by growing things and the buzz of late summer bees, and something passed between them. An understanding. A recognition of kindred souls who'd both been marked by loss and found wanting by the world's narrow definitions of worth. "Would you like to stay for supper?" The words came out before Martha fully considered them, but once spoken, she didn't want to take them back. "It's nothing fancy, just chicken and dumplings, but there's plenty." Grant's smile returned, softening his weathered features. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Winslow. Martha, please call me Martha. Only if you'll call me Grant." They worked together to finish the weeding. Then Grant chopped wood for her stove while Martha prepared the meal. It felt natural, comfortable, like a dance they'd practiced 1,000 times. Over supper, they talked about everything and nothing. Grant shared stories of his travels, the different landscapes he'd seen, the characters he'd met. Martha told him about her garden, about the books she borrowed from the circuit library, about her dreams of maybe one day opening a small flower shop. "Why don't you?" Grant asked, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "These dumplings are exceptional, by the way. Open a shop? With what money? Henry controlled our finances, and now—" She trailed off, not wanting to speak of her husband's abandonment out loud, as if saying it might make it more real. "Now you're in limbo," Grant finished gently. "Not quite married, not quite divorced, with no clear path forward." "Exactly." Martha pushed food around her plate. "And even if I had the means, no one in this town would patronize a business run by a woman like me." "Then maybe this town doesn't deserve you." Grant's words were simple but fierce. "Maybe you deserve better than Placerville, California." The idea lodged in Martha's mind like a seed waiting for rain. What if she didn't have to stay here, subject to judgment and whispers? What if there was another life waiting somewhere else? But reality intruded quickly. I have nowhere to go, Grant. No family left alive, no means of supporting myself elsewhere. I'm trapped. Trapped is a state of mind, Grant said, standing to help clear the plates. But I understand feeling that way. After Sarah and Emma died, I felt trapped in that town, in that house full of memories. Moving on felt impossible until I realized staying was what was actually impossible. They washed dishes side by side, and when Grant finally left as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Martha stood on her porch watching him ride away and feeling less alone than she had in years. Grant's visits became regular after that evening. He'd stop by after his work at the ranch. Always with some excuse. He'd brought vegetables from the ranch's garden to trade. Or he needed advice about a shirt that had torn. Or he'd heard her roof might need checking before the fall rains came. The excuses were transparent and they both knew it, but neither acknowledged the real reason. They simply wanted each other's company. The town noticed, of course. The whispers grew louder, more pointed. Martha heard herself called shameless, heard speculation that this had been her problem all along, that she was too independent, too unwomanly, that Henry had been right to leave. But strangely, the words had lost their power to wound. When she was with Grant, she felt seen for who she actually was, not defined by what her body could or couldn't do. One evening in late September, as they sat on her porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Grant said, "I need to tell you something, Martha. Something I've been thinking about for weeks now." Martha's heart stuttered. She'd been expecting this, dreading it even. The moment when he'd tell her he was moving on, that his time in Placerville was done. "All right. I'm falling in love with you." The words came out plain and honest, without flourish or hesitation. "I know it's complicated. I know you're still technically married, and I know people will talk, but I can't keep pretending these feelings don't exist." Martha couldn't breathe. Love. How could he love her, broken and barren as she was? "Grant, you don't understand. I can't give you children. I can't give you the family you lost." "I know that." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "And I'm telling you it doesn't matter." "How can it not matter? You had a daughter. You know what it's like to be a father. How can you throw that away for a woman who can't stop?" Grant's voice was firm but gentle. He shifted closer, taking both her hands now. "Martha, look at me. Really look at me." She did, seeing in his face nothing but sincerity and tenderness. "I loved being a father," he continued. "Loved Emma with everything I had. But she's gone, and Sarah's gone, and I've spent 5 years grieving them. 5 years thinking I'd never feel alive again. Then I met you." His thumbs traced circles on her hands. "You make me laugh. You challenge me. You have the strongest spirit of anyone I've ever known. You've survived things that would break most people, and you're still here, still growing roses, still finding beauty in the world. That's what I've fallen in love with. Your heart, your strength, your kindness, not your ability to bear children. But everyone expects. I don't care what everyone expects." Grant's voice grew passionate. "I've learned the hard way that life is too short and too precious to live for other people's expectations. I'm 33 years old, Martha. I've seen death, known loss, wandered from place to place looking for something I couldn't name. And then I found you, and I realized what I'd been searching for. Not another chance at the family I lost, but a chance at something new, something different, something real." Tears spilled down Martha's cheeks, but these were different from the bitter tears she'd shed alone in the darkness. These tasted of something dangerous and sweet. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared to believe this, to believe you. That's all right. I'm a patient man." Grant lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'll wait as long as you need. But I need you to know the truth. I don't need children to be happy. I just need you." The words hung in the air between them, solemn as a vow. Martha felt something inside her chest crack open, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she said finally. "But Grant, the complications can be worked through." He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first made her notice him. "One day at a time, Martha. That's all we need to take it. One day at a time." That night, lying alone in her bed, Martha stared at the ceiling and let herself imagine a future she'd thought impossible. A life with Grant, full of conversation and companionship, of shared laughter and quiet evenings. A life where her worth wasn't measured by her womb but by her whole self. It seemed too good to be true, too fragile to trust, but the seed of hope Grant had planted was growing, pushing up through the hard soil of her heart. The next morning, Henry arrived at her door. Martha hadn't seen him in 2 months, and the sight of him standing on her porch, hat in hands, expression carefully neutral, sent her stomach churning. "Martha, we need to talk." She led him into the house that had once been theirs, feeling like a stranger in her own home with him there. He sat at the kitchen table, and she noticed he looked thinner, harder somehow, as if their separation had carved something essential away. "I'm filing for divorce," he said without preamble. "Mr. Richards, the lawyer, says it's simple enough, given the circumstances. Barrenness is grounds, especially when I testify that we've been married 12 years without issue." Martha should have felt devastated. Instead, she felt oddly calm. "All right." Henry blinked, clearly surprised. "All right, that's all you have to say. What would you like me to say, Henry?" "That I'll fight you. That I'll beg you to reconsider." Martha folded her hands on the table. "You made your choice when you left. I'm not going to pretend I haven't made peace with it." "I've heard rumors," Henry said, his voice taking on a sharp edge, "about you and that drifter from the ranch." "People are talking, Martha. People have been talking about me for years. I'm rather used to it. It's shameful. You're still my wife, am I, Henry?" Martha felt anger spark, bright and hot. "Because you're the one who left. You're the one who called me barren and worthless. You're the one who wanted this divorce. You don't get to decide I'm shameful now because I've found a moment of happiness." Henry stood abruptly. "I came here to be civil, to handle this like adults." "Then handle it. File your papers. I won't contest them." Martha rose as well, meeting his eyes without flinching. "But don't come into my house and tell me how to live my life. You gave up that right." He left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Martha sank into her chair, shaking slightly, but underneath the tremors was something solid. She had stood up to Henry, had claimed her right to her own life, and the world hadn't ended. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, as such things went in 1878. By late October, Martha was a free woman, though the stigma of being a divorced barren woman somehow seemed worse than just being barren. But she had Grant, and that made all the difference. They courted properly, despite the whispers. Grant took her to church socials, to the harvest dance, to Sunday picnics by the American River. He bought her flowers from a vendor in Sacramento when he went for supplies, not knowing she could have grown better ones herself, and she cherished them for the thought they represented. He treated her like something precious, but also like an equal, asking her opinions, listening when she spoke, valuing her thoughts. In November, as the first rains began to fall and the hills around Placerville turned emerald green, Grant proposed. They were in Martha's garden, working together to prepare it for winter, when he simply stopped digging and turned to her. "Marry me, Martha, not because of what anyone expects or what society demands. Marry me because I love you, because I want to spend my days with you, because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Martha looked at him, this good man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to voice, and she felt certain for the first time in years. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. They married in December, a small ceremony at the church with only a handful of witnesses. Mr. Henderson stood up for Grant, and Mrs. Chen from the laundry, who had always been quietly kind to Martha, stood up for her. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance. His sermon pointed about redemption and second chances, but neither Martha nor Grant cared. They only had eyes for each other. The town remained disapproving, but Grant had saved enough to buy a small parcel of land about 10 miles outside Placerville, closer to the ranch where he worked. They built a small house together, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, with a wide porch and plenty of space for Martha's garden. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, untainted by past failures or broken dreams. Their first months of marriage were filled with the simple joy of building a life together. Grant worked the ranch while Martha tended their land, planting vegetables and flowers, establishing the roots of their new home. In the evenings, they'd sit together and talk, or read aloud from books, or simply exist in comfortable silence. Grant never once made Martha feel lacking. Instead, he made her feel abundant, overflowing with worth and purpose. In spring, as Martha's garden burst into bloom, a young woman appeared at their door. She was thin, maybe 19 or 20, with a baby in her arms and desperation in her eyes. "Please," she said, swaying slightly. "I've been walking for days. I was told there was a ranch near here that might have work. I need work. I can do anything: cook, clean, mend. Please." Martha brought her inside immediately, settling her at the table with water and bread while Grant unhitched his horse from the plow. The young woman's name was Lucy, and her story tumbled out between bites of food and sips of water. She'd been a maid in Sacramento, had fallen in love with a young man who'd promised marriage, had found herself pregnant and abandoned. Her family had disowned her. She'd been barely surviving, trying to care for her infant son while finding work that would allow her to keep him with her. "Most places won't hire a woman with a baby," Lucy said, tears streaming down her face. "They say I'm immoral, that I brought shame on myself. I don't know what to do. I'm so afraid I'll lose Thomas that they'll take him away and put him in an orphanage." Martha and Grant exchanged a long look. In that look was an entire conversation, an understanding that went beyond words. "You can stay here," Martha said firmly. "We have a spare room, and heaven knows I could use help with the garden and the house. Grant's hoping to buy more land, expand into a real ranch, and we'll need help for that too." "I can't pay you," Lucy whispered. "I have nothing." "We're not asking for payment," Grant said gently. "Just honest work when you're able and help around the place. In return, you'll have a home, meals, and safety for you and your boy." Lucy broke down completely, sobbing with relief, and little Thomas woke and began to cry in sympathy. Martha reached out instinctively, and Lucy, too exhausted to do otherwise, let her take the baby. Martha held the warm weight of him, felt his small body against her chest, and something in her ached, but it was a sweet ache, not the bitter pain she'd known before. Grant came to stand beside her, looking down at the baby with soft eyes. "He's a handsome little fellow." "He is," Martha agreed, rocking gently. She looked up at her husband and saw complete peace in his face, no regret, no longing for what might have been, just acceptance of what was. Lucy stayed. She proved to be a hard worker and good company, and little Thomas brought life and laughter to their small home. As he grew from infant to toddler, Martha found herself stepping naturally into a role she'd never expected: not mother exactly, but something close. Aunt, perhaps, or guardian. She taught him to walk in her garden, showed him how to be gentle with growing things, watched him discover butterflies and beetles with wonder. Grant expanded their land, bought cattle, slowly built a small but respectable ranch. Lucy met a ranch hand named Samuel, a quiet, serious young man who courted her properly and didn't care about her past. They married when Thomas was 2, building a small cabin on the edge of Grant and Martha's property, becoming not just employees but family. 3 years into their marriage, Martha and Grant were sitting on their porch one evening, watching Thomas chase fireflies while Lucy and Samuel looked on, when Grant took Martha's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked, as he often did. Martha thought about her answer, really considered it. She thought about the garden that had flourished beyond her wildest dreams, now supplying produce to several families in Placerville. She thought about the flower business she'd started, small but growing, selling arrangements and seeds. She thought about Lucy and Samuel and little Thomas, about the community they'd built on this small piece of land. She thought about Grant, who had kept every promise, who loved her exactly as she was, who had never once made her feel like she was missing something essential. "I'm happy," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm more than happy, I'm content. Good." Grant lifted her hand to his lips. "Because I don't need more than this to be happy. I've got you, and that's everything." 2 years later, Lucy gave birth to twin girls, and Martha helped deliver them, her hands steady and sure as she welcomed new life into the world. Samuel beamed with pride, and Lucy glowed with exhaustion and joy. Martha held those tiny babies, one in each arm, and felt nothing but happiness for her friends, for this family they'd created together. Grant stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, and she could feel his contentment radiating like heat. "They're beautiful," he murmured. "They are." Martha looked up at him. "We're blessed, aren't we, in ways I never expected." "More than blessed," Grant agreed. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch prospered. Martha's flower business grew large enough that she hired 2 women from town to help, both of them facing their own judgments from the community, both grateful for the work and acceptance. Thomas grew tall and strong, calling Martha and Grant aunt and uncle, loving them with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who'd never known anything but acceptance. Placerville slowly changed its opinion, or at least stopped actively judging. Martha and Grant's success was hard to ignore, and their obvious happiness even harder. The whispers faded, replaced by grudging respect, then actual friendships. Mrs. Henderson began inviting Martha to ladies' auxiliary meetings. Men sought Grant's advice on cattle and land management. They became respected members of the community, not despite their unconventional family, but because of the goodness they'd built from their brokenness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant gave Martha a beautifully carved wooden sign that he'd commissioned from a craftsman in Sacramento. It read, "Anderson Ranch and Gardens," with roses carved around the border. "I thought it was time we made it official," he said, hanging it above their porch. "This is your legacy as much as mine. More, maybe." Martha traced the carved roses with her fingers, tears blurring her vision. "I never imagined," she whispered. "That day you helped me pick up my dropped packages, I never imagined any of this." Grant pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I did. From the very first moment I saw you on your knees gathering broken eggs, pride and hurt and strength all mixed together in your face, I knew you were someone special, someone worth knowing, someone worth loving." "Even though I'm barren," Martha said, the word no longer carrying its old sting. "You're not barren," Grant said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "You've grown life all around us. This garden, this business, this community we've built. Lucy and Samuel and Thomas, they're thriving because you gave them a place to grow. Those women you've hired, giving them dignity and purpose when the world had written them off. That's not barren, Martha. That's abundant. That's overflowing with life. Martha kissed him then, there on their porch with their sign swaying gently in the breeze, and felt the absolute truth of his words settle into her bones. She had spent so many years believing the lie that her worth was tied to her womb, that her failure to bear children made her less than whole. But Grant had shown her a different truth, had loved her into understanding that there were countless ways to nurture life, to leave a mark on the world, to matter. Thomas turned 16 and asked Grant to teach him ranching properly, saying he wanted to stay and work the land, maybe buy his own parcel someday nearby. Lucy's twins, Sarah and Emma, named with Martha and Grant's blessing after Grant's lost daughter and wife, were bright, curious girls who spent hours in Martha's garden, learning the names of flowers and the secrets of making things grow. One evening, when Thomas was 17 and the twins were 11, they all gathered at Martha and Grant's house for Sunday supper, a tradition that had developed over the years. The table was crowded, full of laughter and conversation, of shared food and easy affection. Samuel was telling a story about a stubborn cow, making everyone laugh, while Lucy served pie and the girls chattered about a book they were reading. Grant caught Martha's eye across the table and smiled, that same warm, genuine smile that had first made her heart stir all those years ago. She smiled back, feeling the weight of happiness like a warm blanket. After everyone had left and the dishes were washed, Grant and Martha walked out to the garden in the twilight. The air was soft, filled with the scent of roses and jasmine, the sound of crickets beginning their evening song. They walked in comfortable silence, hand in hand, through the paths Martha had created, past the vegetables and flowers that fed both body and soul. "You ever regret it?" Martha asked suddenly. "Choosing me, choosing this life?" Grant stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Not for one single second. Martha, you gave me a reason to live again when I thought I'd buried my heart with my first family. You showed me that love doesn't run out, that there's always room for more, that family isn't just blood." "I feel the same," Martha said softly. "You saved me, Grant, not from being alone, but from believing the lie that I was worthless. You saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw my failure. You taught me that I was enough exactly as I am." "You were always enough," Grant said, cupping her face in his hands. "I just helped you see what was already there." They stood together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. Around them, the garden whispered and sighed, full of life they had nurtured together, testament to the truth that there are many ways to be fruitful, many ways to matter, many ways to love. Martha thought about the girl she'd been, 35 and shamed, broken by the weight of other people's expectations, convinced her life was over. She thought about the woman she'd become, confident and purposeful, surrounded by love and legacy. The journey between those two versions of herself had been painful, but it had also been necessary, leading her to exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," she told Grant, simple words that carried the weight of everything she felt. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. "And I don't need more than this to be happy. I've got you, and that's everything." They walked back to their house hand in hand, past the sign that proclaimed their shared legacy, past the garden that bloomed in testament to Martha's gifts, past the life they had built together from rejection and loss. The house glowed warm with lamplight, welcoming them home, and inside, on the mantel, sat a photograph taken the previous summer of their whole family. Everyone smiling, everyone together, everyone whole. Martha had learned that barrenness was a lie, that worth couldn't be measured by children alone, that there were infinite ways to nurture life and love. She had learned that the right person would see past society's expectations to the truth of who she was. She had learned that happy endings sometimes looked nothing like you imagined, and were all the more precious for their unexpectedness. As she and Grant settled into their evening routine, reading together by lamplight, his hand warm in hers, Martha felt profoundly grateful for that day in town when she'd stumbled, and a stranger had helped her gather her broken things. That small act of kindness had opened the door to everything that followed, to a love that saw her completely, to a life that fulfilled her in ways she'd never anticipated. The Wild West could be harsh and unforgiving, its judgments cruel and its mercy scarce, but it could also be a place of redemption, of second chances, of finding family in unexpected places. Martha had found all of that and more. She had found Grant, who didn't need her to be anything other than herself, who had looked at her brokenness and seen beauty, who had taken her hand and said simply, "You're enough." Years continued to pass in their quiet contentment. The ranch expanded further. Thomas married a girl from Sacramento and brought her home to the family, building his own house on Anderson land, making it truly a family enterprise. The twins grew into beautiful, capable young women who ran Martha's flower business with skill and innovation, expanding into Sacramento and beyond. Martha and Grant grew older together, their hair turning silver, their steps perhaps slower, but their love undiminished. They still walked in the garden each evening, still sat on their porch watching the sun set over the California hills, still held hands and talked about everything and nothing. One evening, when Martha was 55 and Grant was 53, they sat together watching Thomas's children play in the yard while Sarah's new husband helped Grant repair a fence post, and Emma directed the planting of a new rose garden. 3 generations now called Anderson Ranch home, and a 4th was on the way. "Look at all this," Grant said softly. "Look at what we built." Martha surveyed the scene before them, the thriving ranch, the beautiful gardens, the family that had grown from seeds of kindness and acceptance. "We did well, didn't we?" "Better than well," Grant said, squeezing her hand. "We created exactly what we needed, not what anyone else told us we should want, but what our hearts actually needed." "I was so afraid," Martha admitted, thinking back to that terrified woman of 35, shamed and certain her life was ending. "So afraid that being barren meant I'd never matter, never be loved, never have a legacy." "But you were never barren," Grant said, gesturing to the scene before them. "You were just waiting to bloom in the right soil, with the right person beside you, loving you exactly as you were." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for over 20 years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for loving me, for not needing more." "I meant what I said all those years ago," Grant replied, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. "I don't need more to be happy. I never did. You were always enough. You were always everything." The sun set in shades of gold and rose, painting the California sky in colors that rivaled Martha's finest flowers. Children's laughter rang out clear and sweet. The smell of supper cooking drifted from the house. Somewhere, cattle lowed peacefully, and the sound of hammers signaled continued growth and building. Martha closed her eyes and breathed it all in. This life she'd never imagined, this happiness she'd thought forever beyond her reach. She had been shamed for being barren at 35, told she was worthless, less than a woman, a failure. But a cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle heart had looked at her and said, "I don't need more to be happy." And in that simple statement, he had given her everything. Not just his love, but permission to see herself differently, to recognize that her worth wasn't defined by her womb but by her whole self, her strength, her kindness, her capacity to nurture life in all its forms. Grant had loved her into wholeness, and in doing so, had shown her how to create a legacy that went far beyond blood and biology. As the stars emerged and Grant helped her to her feet, guiding her inside where their family waited, Martha felt complete. Not because she had borne children, but because she had lived fully, loved deeply, and created beauty from brokenness. She had taken the shame meant to destroy her and transformed it into strength. She had taken rejection and turned it into redemption. The Wild West had tried to break her, but instead, it had become the setting for her greatest triumph, a love story that proved worth wasn't measured by society's narrow standards, but by the depth of connection between two souls who saw each other truly and chose each other completely. Martha Winslow Anderson had been shamed for being barren, but she had learned the greatest truth of all, that a woman who could make roses bloom in harsh soil, who could build family from strangers, who could create legacy from love, was anything but barren. She was abundant. She was overflowing. She was enough, exactly as she was and always had been.